Welcome to this new MAPS webinar. Today, we will present a multi-stakeholder approach for improving procurement in Lebanon. We are waiting some minutes for participants that are still in the waiting room. This webinar is being recorded and we will start shortly. So we have today, and I think we can move to the next slide now. This webinar will have English and Arabic interpretation. It will be available clicking the small icon with a globe that you will see in the toolbar in the bottom of your screen. And as said, we will record this event both in Arabic and in English, and we will publish the recording on the MAPS website as soon as this webinar is finished. We want to make this as interactive as possible, and you will see that we are intending to have a lively discussion both with the panelists and presenters today, but also with you. So please submit your questions via the Zoom chat or also on social media using the hashtag MAPSLebanon. So first, I would like to give the floor to give some opening remarks to Ms. Mona Kuzi, resident representative of the World Bank in Lebanon. Ms. Kuzi, the floor is yours.
Sorry, hi, I'm unmuted, okay. Great, thank you so much, everyone, I'm very happy to be here and to represent, unfortunately, our director for the Mashriq department was due to give the opening remarks, and I'm very happy to be here on his behalf and to take part in this really important event to address how MAPS can be harnessed effectively for public procurement reform. As you all know, significant portions of budgets are annually spent through the procurement system, estimated at around 15 to 20% of GDP, yet they lose a quarter of the spending due to inefficiencies and waste. Pressure to improve procurement practices is increasing as the government grapples with unprecedented levels of debt, decline in tax collection, and increased income inequality. Therefore, sound public procurement can free millions of dollars a year in savings annually that could be used to address paramount financial, economic, and social challenges. As well as you all know, the international pleas from donors for public procurement reform were escalated and have become particularly strong after the Port of Beirut explosion. The international community tied public procurement reform to funding, stressing the urgent need to strengthen public procurement processes and procedures to address the deepening crisis, to strengthen governance and accountability, and restore confidence in state institutions. So there is a harmonized and coordinated approach to reforming Lebanon's public procurement system among international donors. The MAPS assessment was requested by the Ministry of Finance, and the Minister of Finance nominated the Institute of Finance as the focal point to coordinate the National Assessment Steering Committee. The support was extended by the Global Procurement Partnership Multi-Donor Trust Fund. This is a World Bank administered trust fund for assisting in public procurement reform at the global as well as at country level. So this MDTF is implemented with generous contributions from the European Commission, Agence Française de Développement, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, as well as the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, known as SECO. So we're happy that finally in July 2021, Lebanon ushered in a new era of good governance by ratifying the new public procurement law for public procurement law 244/2021. The new public procurement law signaled a major milestone in Lebanon's journey to achieving a modern public procurement system, and it also highlights the impactful contributions of the World Bank procurement team, who have been working extremely excellently with the Institute of Finance on this public procurement reform. So in the short term, Lebanon's priority should be to validate the action plan for capacity building and a central electronic platform. Another priority would be to develop and disseminate explanatory guidelines for the law, develop a policy note on risk management in public procurement, among many other actions. Just to finally say that we're very pleased with the ratification of the new public procurement law. It is a first step in a long road to achieving a modern public procurement system. The World Bank continues to collaborate closely with other international donors and remains extremely committed to support Lebanon in its efforts towards public procurement reform, given its economic, social, and development significance and its critical role in rebuilding trust between citizens and the state. Thank you very much again, and looking forward to the discussions going forward.
Thank you very much for this event. We want to have several objectives, and I think it matches very well with what you were saying. We want to focus on what's upcoming for Lebanon regarding improving public procurement, and we want to understand the impact and value of MAPS and the MAPS findings and recommendations to that end. And also, second, we want to understand how a good stakeholder management throughout the assessment, but also, even more importantly, for the reform is fundamental to really improving procurement systems. So for the first part of this session, I'd like to invite Ms. Lamia Mojabet-Bisat, advisor to the Minister of Finance in Lebanon, and Ms. Lina Fares, senior procurement specialist at the World Bank, to present Lebanon's reform strategy and action plan for the upcoming years. Lamia and Lina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicolas. Lamia?
Thank you, Nicolas. I will start and pass on to Lina. I see that you're sharing from your side the PowerPoint, so we'll to the next one. As you said, August 2022, after 61 sessions at Parliament, and in a record time, in less than 5 months, Lebanon was able to finally ratify a law, a new public procurement law. This effort has been going on while Lebanon was undergoing a multiple crisis, economic, financial, but also COVID crisis, compounded by, of course, the effect of the explosion of the port of Beirut, the second non-nuclear explosion in history. This explosion damaged severely the Parliament where we were holding our meetings, and the Institute of Finance, which is the public autonomous agency at the Ministry of Finance, who was leading on this reform on behalf of the Ministry of Finance. Nonetheless, despite a very, very difficult phase, Lebanon was able to proceed and to move on this very important milestone in the long list of structural financial governance reform that that Lebanon committed to. If we go to slide, you will see that, next slide, please. This reform was based on a very extensive exercise, MAPS, consultative exercise. And from the start, in our approach, we wanted that this reform will basically be one of the products of this reform, or the first product, be grounded in evidence-based consultative exercise, large-scale consultative exercise. And MAPS was extremely instrumental and important in this approach because it allowed, first of all, to gather evidence needed on which was designed the new law. The two exercises were going on in parallel, and it was very participative. So it embarked 18 representatives from 15 governmental institutions that composed the National Steering Committee, who led this exercise. So we had a MAPS national focal point, that is the institute, plus a MAPS national steering committee. And this National Steering Committee represented the main spenders in the Republic, and it included also, in addition to line ministries, public institutions, oversight bodies, also municipalities and unions of municipalities, which are the local government in Lebanon, in addition to business associations, syndicates, small and medium enterprises, and civil society organizations. So when we say that it was a large consultative exercises, this is what we mean. We mean a very extensive consultation process and participant to every single assessment. And this, I am focusing on this because it was very hard to reach a consensus in Lebanon on how we want to do the reform and what were the main, let's say, axis of the procurement law, and what would be the consequences after promulgation of the law. So MAPS was kind of the leveling the field of knowledge between all the actors, but also preparing for the ownership of the law and ownership of all the reform steps that will go after the law. So the MAPS exercise was produced after 1.5 years of consultation with more than 100 stakeholders, and it laid the vision. And it got the seal of approval in March 2022. The report was published and available, thanks to the Global Procurement Partnership. This exercise was conducted with technical support from AFD and from the World Bank, and it was nationally led, as I said, Institute of Finance. Next slide, please. The national strategy that came after or during the preparation of national strategy, during the end phase of law discussion in Parliament, we wished it to be grounded in the MAPS exercise. So what we did, again, always grounding in the findings of MAPS. The findings of MAPS were extremely instrumental because we knew the situation in Lebanon was very archaic, lots of overlaps in legislations, but also in mandate of institutions. MAPS allowed to bring all this information forward, and everybody recognized that the situation, while doing the MAPS exercise, that the situation is worse than what we thought. So we built the national strategy around the exercise and how to bring, and the national strategy brought the answers, how to bring the regulatory and policy framework in line with the practices so that the scores that were very, very low could be eventually in the next MAPS exercise brought to a better value. The same thing, the second pillar of MAPS is institutional framework. So the national strategy had a second pillar on how to create an institutional framework for successful procurement management and how to build the corresponding capacity in institution. The third pillar of the national strategy revolved around, of course, the procurement operation and market, and every single action under this third pillar of the national strategy feeds into ensuring economy and efficiency in the procurement operation. The fourth pillar and actions that went in the national strategy concerned accountability, integrity, and transparency. So you see that the MAPS did not only help us in understanding the gaps on the legal side, but also had set the vision for the strategy of the procurement reform itself. Next slide, please. To put the strategy in practice, a reform management and a coordinated approach was set. The strategy basically allowed us to create an interministerial committee that held its meeting for the first time last Tuesday. Now we have a national coordinator that was named by the Council of Ministers, which remained the Institut des Finances. And the Institut des Finances is working with all stakeholders to make sure that the national strategy actions move on and progress on a steady path with the help of course, the international support with the technical assistance, expertise, policy advice from the partners organization. So the tracks that are now being pushed into progress or prioritized as priority actions are the legislations that are going to complement the law, the standard bidding documents that we need for implementation, the guidelines and policies, the forms and templates, and of course, some action on the capacity building. In Lebanon today, there are plenty of challenges for us to progress on implementing the national strategy. The progress is function, of course, of the collapse of state institution and the very difficult budgetary conditions in which we are operating. And this is why we were today calling on the donor community to help us in moving forward. In addition to the national strategy, the overall general strategy, we designed also 3 complementary strategy, one on capacity building, another one on e-procurement, and the third one on risk management. They are ongoing and some of them were put into consultation. Next. As we progress, we just want to probably draw a couple of lessons from this experience. We will probably talk about them later, but the MAPS exercise was a long one. It took 1.5 years, and there are plenty of lessons learned from this exercise. Some of them will be very instrumental for other countries who wish to embark into MAPS. It's important for us, the main learning message is that there should be some capacity in government and the national coordinator who is incapacitated to conduct such an exercise. But the second most important message is that this exercise need not be seen as a standalone exercise, but as a pillar for moving the reform beyond the MAPS, so that the results of MAP be put into practice. They need to, this evidence that is generated by the MAPS exercise ought to be used while designing all the institutional infrastructure, the new legal infrastructure, and also so that eventually MAPS becomes as a guide for the actual reform implementation phase. Next, please.
Yeah, actually, this table was for me. That's fine.
So sorry.
It's okay. It's okay, Lamia, because this table actually
reduced the PowerPoint presentation. So that's my point of view, but I'm handing on to you to Lina.
That's fine. This table reflects the timelines of the different steps, the milestones actually within the different steps. In comparison to other countries, Lebanon actually performed maybe the best, if I may, say it in this term, time-wise. The preparation period from the request that was issued in October 2018 till establishing the National Steering Committee took 6 months. The preparation of the concept note that started in April 2019 and the organization analyzing country context, assessment, validation, drafting report took 15 months. The quality review that is by MAPS Secretariat and Global Team and OECD started in 2020, and it took, and the report was published in February 2022, so it took another 13 months. But of course, during that period, the drafting of the law was initiated, etc. So a total of 1,042 days, or 34 months. The mobilization was around 100 stakeholders and 18 members of steering committee. The focal point of IOF was composed of 4 to 5 almost full-time people. The World Bank and AFD specialists were also mobilized along the process, and 2 consultants. So as a procurement person, my tendency is to assess the level of effort and the value for money. After we see the benefit into setting the grounds for the reform, we all agree that it was worth the effort, and the reform journey started from that milestone. Now, lessons learned, if I may take like a couple of minutes for that. The lessons learned is that we started, for example, by the meeting, the introductory workshop that is not in the methodology of MAPS. That introductory workshop, I think that it would have got a better impact to be given to the stakeholders in general if it was provided by MAPS partner during the preparation of the concept notes in early stages. Definitely the composition of the assessment team is key. Knowledgeable, experienced, strongly committed people are the ingredients for this level of effort that, as I described, is a tremendous work next to the commitments of those people to their own institutions. So it was not an easy exercise to incentivize all these people if it was not themselves that were like very committed. Now, what was the main constraints? The lack of reliable, readably accessible data, the difficulty in formulating clear and concise and coherent statements with respect to the assessment criteria, because also the assessment criteria were not accessible, I mean, to all countries in all contexts. It is we have to customize it maybe. And the most difficult part was the voyage between the Arabic and the English language. So we have the maps in English, we had to translate it in Arabic and then receive the comments in Arabic, then retranslate it into English, re-verify the English quality to be submitted to the consultants. So that back and forth of translation also is a factor to be accounted for and to be financed. Now we could overcome those constraints by reconciling between the quantitative indicators and the qualitative. We verified the quantitative versus the qualitative because we couldn't access, like in any other country maybe, or other developed country where you have the procurement plan published, the tender documents in systematic manner, you can collect those. It was not at all an easy exercise. The standard MAPS indicator matrix was used, in fact. At the beginning, it was really with high ambition to put links on all the documents that were used to refer to the laws, etc. But while developing all this and the translation and receiving the the assessment in written. So we had to also retranslate them into the matrix, etc. So we gave up a little bit on the matrix to be finalized, but we used all the data from the matrix into the report. So I'm saying this not to, just to tell you the expectation from MAPS OECD to have this to take this into account. The feedback from the MAPS global team was received. The comments was very reasonable and very constructive. And here I thank all those who were behind those comments. Now, lessons learned for the future: to allocate financial resources. We had only $90,000 for all this 2 years project. Even if we could allocate, it was enough only to finance the international consultant and not even his trips. We had to find a way to finance his trips. We had to find a way to translate. We had to find a way to provide like coffee and the coffee breaks for those assessments. And here I thank Lamia for her, Lamia and her team. They were sometimes bringing their the apples and fruits from their own garden and doing sandwiches at home, very decent and very nicely wrapped to assessment. So here also chapeau for this going beyond the duties. Second, we have to optimize technical and methodological advice to countries, as OECD and MAPS team. We have to guide the countries on targeted communication. Lamia, we could secure some funds for IOF to draft a communication campaign, but this is not given to others. So I think that communication is key in this activity, though we are including, like Lamia said, 100 stakeholders, but this 100 is not the 2,000 concerned in the country. Like this event, like this current event, we have to share the lessons, to manage the expectations, and to from the beginning, describe MAPS assessment as just a trampoline, is a jumping point towards the reform. So the incentive is behind conducting all the assessment. Because at the beginning, it was assessment for assessment, but now that we have it, we think that it is a worth exercise, very, very good exercise, and it is setting the philosophy for all others, similar, activities within the reform as a strategic approach to the capacity building, professionalization, e-procurement, etc. We have always this, this structured approach to subsequent reform activities. This is all what I have to say. I can go on, but I know I'm aware of time. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lamia and Lina. It was, I think, very interesting to hear the perspectives, both of how MAPS was used, what were the results, but also even the challenges and the lessons learned from these type of exercises that can also be useful in many other contexts. So to keep on the discussion, if we can go ahead with the slides, I'd like to invite Com Deschry, Project Team Leader, Financial Governance at Agence Française de Développement. Com knows very well from the inside the MAPS initiative, knows very well the context in Lebanon. So we are very pleased to have him moderate the panel that we will have with stakeholders from different sectors in the country. So over to you, Com.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, and thanks to all the Secretariat team for putting this event together. It's a great opportunity, I think, to see how MAPS is not an end in itself, but a way to inform decision-making about reform, about what sort of objectives should be prioritized, with whom to work, how to build a coalition for change. In that sense, especially since MAPS is such a young tool in its current iteration, it's great to get feedback from people involved in the field, in country, doing day after day the nitty-gritty of moving forward the reform agenda in public procurement. And to share the experience with us today, we have 3 distinct panelists plus one who could not attend, but who has kindly accepted to record some of his thoughts that we will display during the panel. So without further ado, let me quickly introduce our panelists and get the discussion going. So with us today, we have Basma Abdul-Khalek, who is an economist at the Institute of Finance. So the Institute of Finance is one of the lead agencies of the Ministry of Finance in Lebanon and has been the coordinating agency for implementing the maps, but also for engaging with Parliament so that the recommendation of the assessment find their way into the new procurement law. Basma, for 11 years, has been contributing to the Institute missions. Since 2018, more specifically, she is focused on public procurement reform and works with the core group of specialists on the Lebanese side on both the MAPS assessment, the public procurement law, the reform action plan, and its subsequent implementation. We also have with us Lina, who has already made some comments. So just quickly to recall, Lina is a senior public procurement specialist at the World Bank. She represents the donor side in the discussion here. An architect by training, she has been involved in public procurement for 15 years and supports public procurement reform in Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. Also with us to represent and carry forward the voice of the civil society, we have Mohamed Al-Magabat, who is a senior legal consultant at the Lebanese Transparency Association, LTA. So LTA is a Lebanese NGO founded to reduce corruption and promote accountability in Lebanon, and is the national chapter of Transparency International in the country. Mr. Al-Magabat has worked on several anti-corruption reforms, accountability, good governance topic, including how government control bodies work and should operate in Lebanon. And more specifically on public procurement, he has worked on the issue of beneficial ownerships and the role of CSOs in monitoring public procurement. And last but not least, we were due to have Mr. Daniel Aboud, who is the head of the International Relations Committee of the board of the Association of Lebanese Industrialists, representing the private sector. Unfortunately, he could not make it today, but he has kindly accepted, as I said, to record some of his thoughts. So we will be displaying them in video format throughout the discussion. Maybe to start the discussion, it's been underlined, highlighted many times already in the presentation of both Lamia and Lina, that the maps in Lebanon was a collective exercise. Maybe my first question to our panelists is that you each represent a different stakeholder in public procurement, be it national authorities, administration, development partners, civil society, and for Mr. Aboud, the private sector. And my question therefore was, based on your prior experience in Lebanon and from your own point of view, do you think that the maps fairly represented the issues of the system, and which conclusion of the assessment in Lebanon struck you the most? Perhaps we could start with you, Basma, if you're willing.
Yes, thank you, Com, for this introduction. First, allow me to thank and express our deep appreciation to Madam Secretariat at OECD for organizing this exchange webinar on Lebanon, and for all those who are attending today. As I'm talking now, I got some memories 3 years back in April 2019, when we hosted at the IOF the first introductory workshop for the Assessment Steering Committee on MAPS methodology. And we had with us a distinguished contribution of our partners who accompanied us throughout the process, the World Bank, the IFD, and OECD, namely Sigma experts, Erika, who is with us today, who shared at that time important guidance and technical advice and supports through this tough but enriching journey. So thank you all. And I'm happy today to be representing the IOF to talk about this experience and share our thoughts. And to answer your question, Tom, for the first time, the public procurement system in Lebanon as a whole, reflecting really this strategic importance of public procurement as one of the public component. So seen as a key pillar for economic growth, for sustainable development. In our case in Lebanon, it's key for economic revival, for the economy back on track. So MAPS helps us this solid and sustained reform vision of the system, not limiting it to changing the laws or reforming the legal system only. As we know, traditionally in countries, when a law is voted, we think that the reform is done. No. So this MAPS changed the culture, the mindset, and how reforms are perceived. Second, when we started the MAPS, we shaped the strategic policy approach to public procurement, financial governance, and sustainable development. The findings precisely of the assessment has shown deep vulnerability. Yes.
Basma, your voice is cutting. Maybe you would put off your video.
Yes, we will try like this. I was saying that the finding of the assessment in Lebanon has shown deep vulnerability in how public markets are conducted. And we as government have now a better understanding of the underlying reasons of these inefficiencies. Examples and key ones like the absence of adequate planning and integration of with the budget exercise, the elite capture of the market, very limited range and maneuver for competition. That was documented and studied in study report, but was deeply explored. That's allowed us to explore this more. And also the inadequate delivery of public services to citizens. So if you want to retain some key, if you want findings from the assessment, I will say the key findings across the 4 pillars. The first one is that the legal framework deemed to pass non-compliant with international practices and principles. The second, we found weak institutional capacities and deep ones, with notable gaps in capacities and technology infrastructure at line ministries and procuring entities that increase corruption risks. Third, on practices, non-standardized practices operance with excessive recourse to mutual agreements that limit fair competition and entry of new competitors and small and medium enterprises in the market. And finally, spotty access to data and poor monitoring and oversight and unstructured way of collecting data and making it available for the system, which also represented a high corruption risk and, if you want, a very big gap on the transparency side. So this is in a nutshell about what we think main highlights of the findings.
Thank you, Basma. I'm afraid that the bandwidth is a bit shaky, so we didn't necessarily catch everything you say, but at least from what I caught, I understand that you have actually struck with the fact that on the regulatory basis, the very fragmented nature of the regulatory framework of public procurement in Lebanon was really what struck you the most. That and the fact that with very few data being centralized and very limited ability for private and civil actors to access information, overall transparency of the system was low. That were for you the 2 of the key challenges identified through the assessment. I now turn to Lina and Mohammed. Was this also the case for you? Or was it what you expected to find in the maps?
What Basma described is exactly what we had felt, and actually we as citizens, me as a citizen and me as a World Bank, we were always saying that nothing is happening, nothing is good, but we couldn't find a way to convince and to prove it. So MAPS proved it. We had always, we have a say in Lebanon that the laws exist, but they are not applied. But here we discovered that even the law didn't exist. So this is why the maps, the beauty of maps is to prove it. So sometimes we were like in front of e-procurement questions. We don't have e-procurement. So, okay, so all the pillar would be, all the indicator will be in 1 minute, you can do 0 and that's it. We're not there. But maps took us more into thinking about it and thinking of the recommendations. So it took us, okay, we don't have, but we can set the pace for that. So yes, the same, of course, the same findings were what Basma was describing. Thank you.
Thank you, Com. I would say also, before looking at the content of the MAPS report, it's really important, like what happened through the MAPS. It was the first state or governmental report that maps a whole legal framework and comes up with fragmentations and gaps. So it took us to another level in a way that the government now and the public knows and the global community knows what are the deficiencies of this system, for example, which can be not as in MAPS, but to other legal frameworks, especially on anti-corruption regulations, could be having some kind of similar methodology that could assess a specific legal framework. As for the content, of course, it was very important to map, the whole legal framework and to assess this legal framework and know where are the gaps and fragmentations, where do we need new laws, where do we need to amend these provisions. So I would say it helped, and it was maybe the first time in the history of Lebanon for the government to make an informed decision, because they had the information all in one place and not scattered across different administrations. So I would totally agree also with what Basma and Lina said.
So providing a holistic view, a complete view of the forest, and not just looking at trees individually, and providing something which is evidence-based, was, in your collective opinion, key at least to set the agenda and get the discussion rolling. Maybe to the Secretariat, would it be possible to broadcast the comments that Mr. Aboud had to this particular question? I'm not sure that the sound is coming through.
MAPS most certainly presents the situation in a very accurate manner. We all knew that the procurement process was dysfunctional, but this is the first time that an assessment is carried out in a systematic way and that the problems are segregated into pillars in order to better be identified. As much as we were convinced that the existing system was deficient, it remains shocking to see how it fails in almost every criterion of all four pillars.
So in a very real sense, I think Mr. Aboud was echoing the collective sentiment of the panelists currently in the webinar, that it finally, by bringing all the different pieces of the puzzle together, gave the starting vision of how appalling were the shortcomings of the system as a whole at the time when the assessment was conducted. Which kind of brings me to a different question is, since everybody had at least some inkling of what were the issues, you would thought that the coordination around pushing through the agenda and the narrative around why it needs to be done, why this reform needs to be done, would be easy. But what the maps showed is that also it was extremely hard to coordinate and bring all the different actors to the table to share information, put evidence together. And the Institute of Finance actually worked very hard to involve all concerned stakeholders during every stage of the process, from the MAPS assessment to drafting the reform strategy to now implementing it. So Basma, this is obviously a daunting task, and it's actually the starting point of this multi-stakeholder approach. Do you have, for all the viewers here today, any practical recommendation or lessons on how to bring people together in that type of endeavors?
Yeah, yes, indeed, Com. It may have went differently, maybe in other country contexts, depending on the stage of the reform, stage of modernizing public procurement. For Lebanon, we started from zero, but we had in mind this approach of consultative process since the beginning. And this approach got more and more solid and structured and sustained through the maps. And we learned from maps a lot how to bring all stakeholders to the table and listen to them, to their concern, and address them in a better way. So just to tell you in a quick feedback about the history, that this started at the National Forum 2018, when we opened the discussion in Lebanon at the national level on the urgency to start a procurement reform to attract investors for needed investment projects in key sectors like the water, solid waste, electricity, transport, really where Lebanon need a lot of investment to boost the economy. And this happened at the heart of a reform momentum after the Sadr conference. So all the elements came together. And this was at the benefit of the country. So and then came MAPS with this consultative approach of more than 100 stakeholders, a nationally led process with one coordinator, one lead, but highly participative and owned by all. And this is why it was sustained. It was owned by all since the beginning. So when we started this fellow parliament, the same approach was maintained. The policymakers, civil society, and private sector was not evident at the beginning. It was a little bit changed some views at the policy level. We went through a kind of awareness training on the big importance of procurement, how to see procurement, how to align with practices. We had hours of meetings with the parliamentarian and other stakeholders, really to align on the same line up gradually. And we kept awareness on the new law and ensuring this buy-in. So in terms of lessons learned, quick ingredients for other countries to go into this process is really to capitalize on national capacities and make them part of the process. Don't underestimate the national capacity at ministries level, at the public institutions, and even at local level. The second one is to bridge the gap between the policymakers, the civil society, make both committed to change, because this is a process that needs also really a change in how we deal with things. Third, to tap in on international support and technical advice and reinvest this in the national dialogue. So take from the international the good lessons and reinvest it in the policy dialogue. Engage all stakeholders, even if the views are opposite. So listen to them, consult on their concerns. And the most important thing is to keep them informed. So don't just communicate one day and then stop communication. We have to grasp that change so that they become themselves the ambassadors for it. So these are our lessons learned from the experience, our hands-on lessons learned.
Thank you, Basma. I'm sorry because the connection had you break up again. So I will try to summarize what I got from your answer, just so everybody can benefit from it, and so that the translator can also put it in Arabic. But from what I understood, you mainly highlighted 4 different points. The necessity to kickstart the assessment, perhaps by having a roundtable or high-level event, connecting the issue of procurement, which is sometimes very arid, sometimes very seen as a sort of administrative process, to more strategic objectives, such as attracting international investment. Was the case in Lebanon in 2018. It could be linked to other objectives in other countries, but it's important to resituate the MAPS assessment and public procurement reform agenda into a wider context so as to create momentum for the assessment and reform exercise. I think your second point was that it's very important at every step to put all the different people around the table, and not just administration, but also end users, private sector, parliamentarians, so that everybody can benefit gradually from the findings of the assessment and get on board around the same message. And that at that stage, it's also important not to engage only the willing, but everybody, even people who have contradictory views, so that it becomes a collective exercise and that everybody can benefit from finding compromise solutions. And last, I think your point was that it's extremely important not to consider MAPS as an outsourced exercise involving just international experts, but really trying to rely on national capacities, both to lead the exercise, coordinate it, bring data, bring insights, reread the reports. So it's nationally owned and nationally advocated for, and then at the recommendation stage, and not just one more report sitting on a desk gathering dust. If I may now turn to what happened after the MAPS assessment, we've all seen that it was quite serious in the way that it underlined the many shortcomings of the public procurement system in Lebanon. Now, perhaps turn to you, Lina, with your experience in supporting a very large range of countries in procurement reform. What do you do when you get that many issues on board, on the table? How do you go about prioritizing them, and how did the World Bank work with the government trying to find a workable way of setting ground zero for a new public procurement system, and then gradually moving in terms of quality and coherence in the policy framework?
Thank you, Tom. I may disappoint you by telling you that despite, because maybe of my experience in other countries, if you don't have a committed government, whatever you put as resources, as donors and World Bank, etc., it will be very difficult to implement reforms. This is the experience based on years of communication with the government, despite the fact that we are very nice, telling the story, telling the truth, advising, etc. So here, MAPS was good because during the exercise of MAPS, a lot of capacity building was embedded in the assessment. The assessor went into looking outside the box. They looked for solutions. They were like driven by the solution much more than hammering and assessing and saying that nothing is not working. So that wealth of experience was communicated to the parliament. And here, yes, we say that the reform is not the law, of course, but to pass a law, you are passing a system inside it. You are doing the institutional, you are set up, you are also advising on the practices. You're saying that it's not good to have classification, it's not good to have, a favorable list, etc. You have to have something else. It's good to have new method of procurement. You have to be open up to communication, etc. So this kind of capacity building, of course, the bank was ready to support, but we are not, out of governance, issues. We are not to participate in the parliament, but we were like behind that. On the other hand, also the communication was possible between the donors. And we know that sometimes the donors, because of their goodwill to help, sometimes they help in a scattered manner or in a non-organized manner. So unfortunately, the explosion of the port was the glue between us, because we had to join the forces, and that created a focal points, communication area, informal manner to communicate and to join our strengths, because each entity has its own area of expertise. So that also created that communication, and I am keen to keep it, even if we are sometimes going into different paths. But given that now we have the national procurement strategy that is endorsed by the Prime Ministry, that is led by the Reform Unit Secretariat, that is the IOF, the donors are to, comply to that strategy, and whomever gives money, that is even better. So this coordination is essential at the donor level and at the government level. And we reach, at least now we have those two elements of success, and let's hope that it will continue, because the reform is a technical part. The policy, the politics, all this is now behind us, more or less. Let's go into the technical. That is easier to deal with than the politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Lina. And I see that the chat room echoed strongly your sentiment and comments about the need to have political will. Otherwise, reform tend to be empty vessels for change. There was also a question that we'll try to address as we move on for the different question on elaborating a bit more about the law, when it will be implemented, what is the timeline for it to be enforced, what are the next challenge and upcoming activities, and et cetera, which kind of actually also introduce, sorry, a second question coming from the chat on a written line of thought from Amal Wadfar Karaki, saying that there is obviously in Lebanon a high degree of uncertainty currently on how this law could be implemented because of the political blockage, the extremely difficult budgetary and economic situation in which the country operates. And the question of Amal was, as a doable action that can be done in the interim to support the realization of public procurement reform? I think this is a question that would be extremely interested in hearing your thoughts on, Mohammed. LTA has been a very vocal supporter of strengthening oversight and transparency in the system. This is also one of the key recommendations of the maps and one of the key pillars of the law. Leaving aside the issue of how the public sector can operate to implement the law, and trying to think a bit outside the box, how can CSOs and NGOs like LTA become active stakeholders to increase transparency and accountability in public procurement?
Before talking about CSOs, I just remembered something from what Lina was talking about. You know, in Lebanon, there is the 3RF framework, reform, reconstruction, and rehabilitation. One of the reforms that is requested or required from the government is to adopt a new public procurement law. So it's like the checklist they have, and the government just think that we adopted a new public procurement law. And we as LTA, we sit on the independent oversight board of the 3RF, and we're telling them always and always, like, adopting a new law is not enough. It's very important to have this new system, modern system, and that will allow for better procurement, but you have to apply the law. We're coming now till we still have like 4 months to initiate enforcing it or implementing it, and we're hoping that there will be political will to implement it, as maybe Lina said. Coming back to CSOs, there are a lot of experiences around the world on how CSOs get involved in public procurement. It's basically based on monitoring the procurement procedures. And there are 2 levels of monitoring the procedures. The first level is to sit at the awarding committee and to see what's happening, to just observe what's happening from the start. And we do really advocate for not just from the start of the awarding committee, but also from preparing the tender documents to have a consultation on what is best for procurement, for procuring specific services or products. So it starts there. The observer or CSO will sit there and just observe what's happening. If they find out about a violation or an attempt to violate anything, whether in bad faith or good faith, the observer could bring it up to the purchasing entity and the committee, the public procurement authority, and the bidders, and can recommend, for example, some kind of solutions or legal solutions. And that's the role. And then at the end of the tender, they prepare the report and they have to put everything in it with the recommendations, what happened, if they see there was a violation or not. And this report should be public. And transparency here plays the role of preemptive role in limiting or preventing conflict of interest, bid rigging, etc. And at the same time, it leads to accountability, because if you see in a report from several observers that there are some specific problems or maybe systemic or individual problems, then stakeholders, interested parties from outside, if they have access to these reports, will push for accountability to the persons involved in breaking the law. The second level, I would say, is after signing the contract, and this is very relevant for Lebanon now, because usually in an ideal world, government still needs outsourcing observers or personnel to help them monitor procurement, the implementation of public contracts. In Lebanon, for example, now we don't have the resources, the financial resources for almost like every administration and purchasing entity, which is why CSOs can play a role in monitoring the implementation. And there are also examples from this, for example, in the Philippines and or South Asia, I would say, where they use or they collaborate with CSOs, governmental entities, to make sure that the services they are procuring, when they are delivered, they are consistent with the specifications that are in the contract. Currently at ATLA, we're working with IOF and the Tenders Administration to find a way to integrate this regime in Lebanon. It is possible within the current legal provisions, the new procurement law, through circulars that coming out from the Public Procurement Authority. They won't be obligatory to purchasing entities, but the Public Procurement Authority will be assessing the procurement procedures based on these circulars. So in a way, you're telling the awarding committees to invite observers that are accredited by the Public Procurement Authority to sit and watch what's happening inside this committee. This is in general, and there is one thing that we always, as when you introduced me, you said that I work on beneficial ownership in public procurement. And this is very important also, because we're also working with IOF and the Tenders Administration on this, for the Public Procurement Authority to be able to collect beneficial ownership information from contractors who are bidding in public contracts or tenders. And this information should be public, which is what we are working with the both entities on. And the reason why we wanted public first, because there is the right to know, the right to access information. Second, also because even the Public Procurement Authority will not have the capacity to verify all the information they're receiving. They need help from CSOs, from investigative journalists, from the global community also needs to know, especially after the economic recovery plan starts being funded, because beneficial ownership information could help uncover conflict of interest, trading in influence, bribes, and all of, and even bid rigging, because a mother company or a parent company could apply to the same tender by owning the beneficial ownership rights in 3 different companies, and will push the 3 different companies to apply to the same tender, which is bid rigging, for example. Beneficial ownership information is not like a magical tool that will help identify these deficiencies, but it will allow for more possibilities in identifying this. And here comes the role of the CSOs also.
Thank you, Mohad, for this very comprehensive answer. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, though we have barely scratched the surface, both of the procurement reform in Lebanon and how to make a team out of this coalition of CSO, private sector, and public administration, along with development partners, in order to try to bring meaningful change that goes beyond the law, which starts with the law, obviously, but goes beyond the law into practice and accountability. Maybe to close up, I will ask one last question, a very concrete one. We have a very busy agenda for the reform in Lebanon. In the weeks and months to come, could you share in 30 seconds max, what is from your own point of view, the key priority you want to work on and to commit to work on to further public procurement reform in Lebanon?
Yes, if you allow me, to answer this question and also indirectly answer the questions that were raised in the Q&A room and in the chat room about the next steps and implementation. As you know, we have now the strategy, the national strategy that was launched by the Prime Minister, and this week we have the approval of the Interministerial Committee on the strategy. So the strategy will be submitted to Council of Ministers for official approval. So the political commitment is reiterated through the strategy. In terms of short-term priority that are reflected in the strategy document and action plan, 4 tracks are now progressing in parallel. Despite our limited budgetary resources, we are trying our best with the technical assistance made available to us with our partners to progress on the secondary legislations and guidelines on the law. And here it's enough to say that the law enters into force in 29th of July 2022, so in 3 months, without need of any secondary legislation to implement it. But these legislations that are being prepared are complementary ones for the regulatory authority and the complaints authority to function and have an modus operandi. So the work on legislations is ongoing. The second pillar ongoing also is the preparation of standard bidding documents and tools for procurers to be able to apply and put into practice all the procurement procedures and methods that are in the law. And here a big work is being done because we have a lot of tools and a lot of templates to be prepared. It is challenging, but it is also demanding, and our experts, pool of experts, national experts, are contributing voluntarily to this. The third pillar is capacity building. Although resources are lacking at the national level to do a full-fledged capacity building to all, we have started the efforts with a pool of trainers that are now ready to deliver the training on the law, and I am happy to see some of them with us today attending. So this capacity building pillar is of high priority, and if not implemented on time, and if not targeting all needed stakeholders, there is a risk at the human capital level to be able to implement the law. So here we ring the bell about the necessity to secure needed resources on that. And the fourth pillar also we are working on with our partners, and thanks to the Global Procurement Partnership, Lebanon will be able to have a set electronic platform at the regulatory authority to be able to do the publication and to collect and manage procurement data. So all these tracks are in parallel. There are a lot of challenges. We are aware of that. But there is a milestone to meet, which is the 29th of July, to be able to have the authority in place, the platform functioning, and all the forms, templates, and the people ready to put the legal text into application.
And we'll leave it at that because we're running out of time, but thank you for the very comprehensive answer as well. It's just not one priorities, but many priorities,
Yes.
all channeling toward
Indeed.
implementation of the law by end of July. Lina,
Yes.
if you had one goal for the upcoming month in terms of support, what would it be?
The one goal is to start in August 2022, because what we have, we can start with what we have. The law doesn't need an implementation decree for the law. It needs implementation decree for defining some of the setting, the institutional setting, like PPA and PPP and the policy authority and the review body. Those can be done by decrees now currently into the drafting. So I think that we should not take an excuse that we cannot start implementation of the law. Standard bidding documents are on the going. I don't want, it will be a failure if we don't start in August, because everybody is waiting for this law. This is it is a challenge, and we need to respect it. Yeah.
Well, priority to action by August, start implementing the law. And Mohammed, what is your key priority to support the reform from LTA in the upcoming month?
Basically, there are 3 priorities that we are working closely with the IOF and the Tenders Administration on, which is the role of csos in monitoring procurement procedures, which I introduced, operationalizing beneficial ownership information in public procurement also, which is also on the way, and some aspects of transparency, not to have absolute secrecy to specific documents, but relative secrecy by applying the harm versus public interest test on specific type of information. And that's in under 30 seconds.
Excellent. Thank you for abiding by it. Nicolas, I will hand you the mic for the concluding remarks.
Thank you, Colm, and thank you to the panelists. I think we could go and speak about these topics for hours and hours, but I think you really condensed well the challenges and upcoming reform that is facing Lebanon today. We reflected on why MAPS was beneficial, and also that MAPS is not an end, but a tool to diagnose a system. And also we reflected that the law, which is one of the key features of this reform in Lebanon, is only one step towards improving procurement in the country. So I think there's a lot of topics that we can discuss further. And I think having different views of stakeholders, both within the country and international, speaking about the same findings and speaking about a recognized finding and recommendations is going to certainly help build a better procurement system in the country. So with that, I would like to close the event. I invite you to continue to follow us on our webpage and on social media. There will be more of these events and more assessments from other countries. Stay tuned for assessments that we will publish from Africa in the next few weeks. So thank you very much, and I wish you a pleasant day wherever you are.